DNN Community Hangout. We're doing take two on using GitHub and Git to manage pull requests on an open source project. And today we're going to focus on DNN, obviously, since we all use and love DNN. So we're going to look at how the DNN team and the DNN project use GitHub to manage all of the incoming pull requests and sort of the process that we go through. I have a couple other people here with me today. I've got Will Stroll, my partner in crime on the community hangouts. Hey, Will.
Hey, Joe. Nice to have a little special edition here, especially for Git.
Yes, a special edition of the special edition, so to speak.
For the special folks.
Yes, so clearly we are much more expert at DNN than we are at Google Hangouts.
Yeah, as everybody says about every software, I'm glad it just works. Everybody points at each other and says that.
We'll try to get the recording working today. We also have with us today Peter Donker, who's also one of the community committers for DNN Platform. Welcome, Peter.
Thank you very much, Joe. I'm happy to be here.
Again.
To everyone else.
So anyway, let's go ahead and get started, and I'm going to go ahead and share out my screen. And this didn't really work yesterday. I think we have ironed out the issues that we had yesterday. So we'll make sure we get all of that. So we'll present it to everybody and not just some people. So yeah, it's like you share, and then you have to hit the share button again, because apparently Google doesn't realize that when I said share my screen, I really meant share my screen.
Well, it's kind of like with Windows when you decide to delete something. It says, "Are you sure?" Yeah. I just tried to delete it. I'm absolutely sure.
So today we're going to talk about the pull request process, and we're really going to look at it from the managing an open source project side of the house, and we'll do some separate videos, and I've actually done one before, and we'll do some more on how do you contribute a pull request to a project. But today we're going to focus on how do you manage that pull request once we've received it. So DNN now runs all of our code commits go through pull requests. So regardless of whether it's one of the internal team members who's doing a change to the platform, or it's a community member who wants to change the platform, everything that's happening in the platform today is coming in through a pull request. And there are really, when you look at pull requests and you look at the processes, and if you read up about this on GitHub, what you see is there are really two different methods for pull requests. One is effectively what they call fork and pull model. So when you come into DNN or any GitHub project, you have this big fork button up at the top. So if I were to fork that, that's going to create a copy of DNN Platform on my personal GitHub account. So that would effectively create a fork or a separate copy of the platform. And then I could make my changes and then submit them back as a pull request. The other model that's often used by internal teams is a shared repository model. And in that model, what happens is that instead of creating a separate repository that's a duplicate of this one or a fork of this main one, instead what we do is we create a bunch of branches within the one repository, and we just create a pull request based off of that other branch in this one repository. And that actually works really well in a team environment, because one of the things about pull requests is that when a pull request comes in, you often have comments or things that may need to be modified or tweaked or whatever with that pull request. And when it's an internal pull request, as I'm processing it, I could actually update that pull request or update and add another commit to that branch without waiting for the original author. Usually it's one of those things like we'll have a pull request, someone will do a pull request before they go on vacation, and you don't want to wait a week or whatever to process this thing. or maybe it's just a minor tweak, and you could do that internally on the branch, which automatically updates the pull request. If it's an external community member who's submitting the pull request, it takes a little bit longer to get the communication cycle and get things in. So we use both of those models depending on whether code's coming from external or internal on the team. So whether it's our DNN Corp engineering team, or even the community committers who have direct commit rights against the repository, we all use the internal model, shared repository model, and then the community uses the fork and pull model. So so those are the two models that you'll see here. We actually will mark items that are coming in from the community. I like to know and be able to report on, how many community contributions are we getting versus how many internal contributions. So we'll use tagging, and there are a couple other places as we go through today where you see how we use tags to help manage pull requests. So what I'm going to do, for us, pull requests are part of a process. Some of this process is manual. Some of this process we use tools like Git and like GitHub to deal with those parts of the process. But there's still quite a bit of dealing with pull requests, which is a manual effort. So I've got a pull request here that looks interesting, and I'm going to go ahead and take a look at this. So one of the things when
just one little clarification, Joe. We use this term DNN like universally. It's very, very ambiguous. So there's DNN the platform, there's DNN the community, and then you mentioned DNN like we're going to be doing this as DNN. And so, but basically what we're showing today is how folks in DNN Corp manage the project on GitHub, as opposed to DNN as a community or anything like that. Correct?
Yes and no, because we actually manage pull requests by the community, and that includes people like Peter Donker, and we've got several other what we call community committers. So they manage pull requests exactly the same way that I do. So whether they work for DNN Corp or not, it's really who has commit rights.
Got it.
And those are the people who are doing this process. And we have a full document that we'll include in the release notes, or a link to the document in the release notes, so you can see what the full process is we go through. But effectively, it starts with identifying a pull request that we want to evaluate and see whether this is ready for acceptance into the project. So first thing I do when I open a pull request is I'll look to make sure that it's got a issue tracking number associated with it. And so this issue tracking number actually links over to our Jira issue tracker. So I know that I could go over to Jira and look in our issue tracker for DNN platform and see this issue should be written up over there as to exactly what the details are, how do you reproduce this, all of the details around that. And the issue tracker is really something that we use primarily for the QA team to keep track of all of the issues. It's also where we do our Kanban boards and other things, so we can track where these various issues are in the process. Because regardless of who's doing the work to fix bugs or to create enhancements, we always want to make sure that everything gets tested, and not necessarily developer tested, if you know what I mean. Developers are generally good about making sure issues work, but we tend to be very focused on just our understanding of the issue. And QA guys, they have a completely different mindset, and they do lots of things to try to break these changes or break these builds that normal devs just don't think that way. So it's nice to have sort of a backup to what we're doing on the development side. So anyway, so I always make sure, and it's a requirement in the platform, in our contribution guidelines, that you have to have a pull request, and you need to identify what that is. If you don't identify it, we'll ask you and leave a comment and get that before we'll proceed. So once I know I've got a pull request number, I generally like to make sure there's a reasonable title, some reasonable description of what this issue is. I don't necessarily want to have to open a second window to go over to Jira to read up all the details. I should have everything that I need right here within GitHub. The other thing I look at is I look at where are they trying to commit, or where are they trying to integrate this with. And here we can see they want to merge one commit into the development branch. So DNN follows the standard Git flow model for bringing pull requests in, and what that means is we have a master branch which effectively is the branch that represents code that is in production. We have a development branch, and that basically means the code that is currently being worked on or being developed. So that would be like our next significant release. We also might have feature branches, so we've got actually one big feature branch that's out there today, which is our next major release, which is DNN 8. So currently we're on 7.4. We're working on 7.4.1, which has got its own release branch, since that one's just in final QA steps. So development for us is really where the day-to-day development happens, and we use other branches for other things. So basically, you can read up on the Git flow process, and that'll tell you how we're using branches. The other thing that I look for here is to see where the person is doing the pull request from. So in this case, I can see that they're doing a pull request right from another branch within this project. If they were doing a pull request, say, externally, so I've got one here from Peter that he's pulled one in. So here I can see he's pulling against, again, my main development branch, but it's coming out of the Donker repository. So that's his personal repository, and then this is the actual branch that he's doing the pull from. So I can tell just by looking at this where it's coming from and where it's going to, and sometimes that's important, because maybe for whatever reason, this pull request may sit there for a month or 2 months or 3 months for any number of reasons, and we may be going back and forth and having a conversation about it. If Peter were to inadvertently delete that branch in his own repository, then the way I have to get the files is a little more complicated. It's a little more manual process, and I can still recreate it. It's just not as easy. But anyway, so this gives me a nice, easy way to quickly see where the files are coming from and where they're going to, making sure that they're being merged against the right branch. Sometimes you can easily tell when someone's trying to merge against the wrong branch, because you'll have like 50 commits show up here, so you'll know immediately that there's a problem. Or you'll have 1,000 file changes, which again would be a big red flag for us. So once I know everything looks okay, like I've got all the basics here, the next step that I want to do is I want to look to see exactly what this pull request looks like. So this is one that I would consider fairly trivial. They can obviously get a lot more complex than this, and this is really just a single line change and really just adding an attribute on a drop-down list within a UI, which is fine. It just tells us what directories are going to get shown in this drop-down list, and that's fine. So everything looks okay there, but now I'm really at the point where I can go ahead and start doing an actual code review. So at this point, I feel like the pull request is a valid pull request. It's got a bug or an issue associated with it. It looks reasonable from a I don't have any questions about the code or about why we're doing this. And they've got all of the needed information here for me to be able to move on. So at this point, I could actually, with this one, if it was trivial enough, I might do a direct merge. And that would be for something like there's a fix and a typo for a resource file, or some other documentation change for an XML documentation in the code. But for actual code changes, I'm going to want to pull those down and do a compile and make sure unit tests are running okay. And the easiest way for me to do that is I'll follow pretty close to what the command line arguments are within here. And we actually use and recommend for a lot of people a tool called SourceTree from Atlassian. Atlassian is the same company that wrote Jira. We're very comfortable with their tools. They do a really good job with their tools. So we can do this one of two ways. We can do it from the GUI, or we can do things from the command line. I actually like doing things from both. I like knowing for simple things I can do it in the GUI, and the command line just gives me a little more control, or when the GUI is acting up, I can often just drop down to the command line and do things. First thing first, I'm going to make sure that I'm in my development environment, and I'm going to make sure that I've got everything that I need in my development environment. I just like to make sure that that environment is nice and clean, because ultimately we're going to merge this environment a little bit later. And it probably doesn't matter because I think the way that GitHub has us doing it now, they've changed it a little bit lately. But I think they're actually having us merge from the remote development branch. But so anyway, I've got yeah.
So this tool is probably gonna be new for a lot of people, because most of the Git resources out there are all command line based, right?
Yeah.
So like what's some of the things going on here? Maybe give us a tour before you kind of start to dig into it.
Yeah. So what I have here on the left is, you can see like the different branches that we have, and these are the branches that are on my local machine. But I also have branches that are up on the server. So if you look up here, obviously there's a lot more branches going on up on the server than I have on my local machine. I don't bring every branch down. Some of these are only there for testing, or they were there for reversions, reverting other code changes. Some of these probably need to be cleaned up a little bit. Like we've got our release branches, so these are branches where as we're going into the final QA step, we'll create a release branch and branch things off. So that's the remote ones.
So the remotes would be that would be GitHub.
That would be GitHub, correct. Or it might be another remote Git server. So I could actually create a remote if I had another server on my network that was running Git. I could actually do a remote against that server. But it's just basically any Git repository that's not my local repository, right? So, and then there's tags. So these are just tags that we create up in GitHub or in Git, if you will, that allow us to quickly get back to certain points in time. So we create them when we do CTPs or betas, or we even do some against some internal builds when it's at some critical stage. So that's the branches. So on the right-hand side here, you actually see a list of all the various changes that are happening in the project, and this graph actually gives you, like you can see, this graph can get pretty detailed if you pull it all the way out. One of the challenges is that it can be kind of hard to track where all of these things branched off of and then got remerged back in. So the graph can get somewhat crazy, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later. But for the most part, you can look at the description area and you'll be fine. And then the bottom half here is just showing me the details of a particular merge or a particular pull or a particular commit in the repository. So I can see what files changed, what actual lines in the file changed, all of that. So you could do all of this same thing from within the command line. It's just I find that the GUI makes some of this a little easier to visualize and a little bit easier to work with. So at this point, I have my development branch, which is the branch I'm on, and I've got all of the latest code down from the server. So let's go ahead and get my local machine ready to bring that down. So I'm just going to, we're going to skip this get fetch origin because that pull actually did a fetch for me as well. So we're going to go ahead and run this git checkout, and this is going to basically create a new branch locally. Going to be called bug DNN 6894, and it's going to get it from the remote origin in that same branch, right? So I'm just going to copy that, and I've actually got a Git window open here. So this is a command line now, and we'll just go ahead and paste that in. And not only is that going to create a new branch on my local machine, if you look in the Git here, what you'll see is that branch, and it'll take a second here. So now this branch is the active branch, right? So it was development, and now it's 6894. And when you look at this command, what I did is I created the local branch from that remote branch. So I went up to the origin, I went up to the server, pulled that bug down. The one thing though is we don't know how old this remote branch is. Like, did they do a branch 30 minutes ago, or did they create this branch maybe 6 months ago? In which case, if I test that bug, am I testing code that's 6 months old but that may not work correctly in the current version as it exists up in the source code, right? So the next command that GitHub tells me I need to do is that I need to do a git merge. And that git merge then effectively is going to take my local development branch, right? So it's going to take development and it's going to merge it over the top of this bug 6894 branch. So that is going to ensure that I've got all of the changes in 6894 that may have happened after she did that initial merge. And so you can see here that there were 58 file changes, 687 insertions, and 346 line deletions, right? So there were quite a few changes since she did that branch a couple of days ago. So this is why you go through all of these steps. So at this point now, I have a local branch that has all of the latest changes in DNN platform that have been committed, and all of the changes that this developer is proposing that we have in the platform. And I'm doing all of this in a safe environment because it's a branch, meaning I could delete this branch and it has no impact on my development environment or the remote development environment. Okay? So right now everything looks good. I've got all the code down. There's one last step that I always like to do whenever I'm changing branches like that, and sorry, wrong command line, is I want to make sure that I don't have any extra files hanging around. When you're changing branches, you don't want an old web config or old install files that are there. So I'll do a git reset, and I probably don't need to do a git reset at this point, but I can do a git clean, and then we'll use the DXF switches. And what that's going to do is that's going to remove any extra files that we don't keep in source code. So like there are a bunch of files here that are install zip files that we create, packages that we create as part of our build process. But those are all build artifacts or install artifacts that are not actually part of the source code itself. So I want to always go back to the raw source code because that's my truth, right? That's the version of truth that we always start from. And so now I've got just the raw source code on my local machine. I don't have any extraneous build functions. And so now I'm going to look in this is actually Visual Studio Code. It's a new code editor that Microsoft just released yesterday. And it's actually very lightweight, so I can use this even if my machine is having some performance issues at the moment. Visual Studio tends to be a little more heavyweight, so today I'm gonna use Visual Studio Code. So let's go look at the
actual. That's pretty messed up, Joe, because I was going to mention Microsoft Code.
So the file that was changed was website admin control panel control bar. So here we're going to go to website admin control panel control bar.ascx, and we can go ahead and look at exactly the file or the line that changed here. And it looks like it's line 338. So we'll scroll down here, and we'll come down to 338. And so if, like for this trivial case, I don't really need to do this because I already know the code looks okay, but if I had a much more complex system or a much more complex change, I would want to come in here and do maybe a little more code inspection, looking at the code, maybe running some tools like ReSharper or whatever against the code to make sure naming was right and things like that. For this one, the code looks fine, and so I can go ahead and leave that for the moment. Then the next thing I would do is I would actually do if I were in Visual Studio, I could just use the tools in Visual Studio, the full-blown Visual Studio, to do the builds to actually test out the code locally. Since I want to avoid Visual Studio today just for some performance reasons, I'm going to actually use some PowerShell modules that I have created, so we'll go ahead and why are you not giving me my, there we go.
So your PowerShell modules, I think, are something that people can download, right? So we'll include that in the show notes.
Yeah, yeah. And it would help if I had the right command up there. I was wondering why the switch there wasn't showing up. And this is just a module, which is just a bunch of PowerShell scripts that I have that allow me to do things related to DNN. So I can do DNN installs. I can do all kinds of things with it. So a couple of the commands that I want.
That's pretty geeky, Joe. Just saying.
So a couple of the commands that I specifically want is I want to be able to do a build. So I can actually say invoke a DNN build, and I could tell it where if like I have a default directory where all of this stuff happens. If I didn't, I could set a directory. I could say what version of Visual Studio I was using. So there are like 4 or 5 different Visual Studio versions that we support, I think from 2010 all the way up to 2015. And then I could say whether I want to do a debug build or not. And so I'm just going to run through. So if I was in Visual Studio, I would do a debug build, and then I would do a release build, and then I would do a debug build again. And that seems like a lot. There are certain reasons why we do that, and it has to do with the way that debug builds and release builds copy files around and do packaging. You could probably skip that first debug build for this thing. Really, the release build is the most important one because that's the one that is going to create all of my install packages. So this is just doing a quick build in the background. We'll let that finish. And I was actually talking to Peter just before this, and Peter has a number of PowerShell scripts as well that do a lot of the same sorts of things, right, Peter?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's funny. As soon as Will said that, that's pretty geeky, Joe. Um, I was like, Will, I think, if you do this on a daily basis, and you wake up one day, you discover there's PowerShell out there. Yeah, it's time well spent on learning PowerShell and how to automate some of your daily tasks. I think it's great, of course, that Joe shares some of this stuff, but certainly for anyone who does this kind of thing on a daily basis, invest some time in PowerShell and just make your life a lot easier.
I was more talking about the ASCII logo of DNN.
Oh.
Sorry. Yeah. That indeed, I did not add an ASCII logo of DNN or an ASCII picture of myself, if you like. No.
Yeah.
But now you should.
Well, the ASCII logo, actually, that was prompted by something I saw that the ASP.NET team do for ASP.NET 5 and DNX, and I thought, well, you know what? I've got these scripts that I've been using for the past 8 years, right? And it's this big conglomeration of scripts, and so I thought.
Well, actually, what I could add to this on a more serious note is, of course, people should realize who are watching this that Git is also perfectly fine to script through PowerShell. So you can actually, and that's what I was demoing to Joe earlier. You can roll up some of those things that we did that are recurring tasks, like checking out the latest version of the development branch, making sure you're pulling in the latest changes, all that stuff you could roll into a script and say, okay, well, just what I did anyway, just reset my DNN, and it clears everything out and starts from scratch again.
Yeah, and that's, even though you can do a lot of things with Visual Studio, what I find is that you spend so much time opening up Visual Studio, waiting for ReSharper to load or waiting for Visual Studio to load and to do all of these other things, that I can do a lot of that just from PowerShell. I don't need to open up Visual Studio to do these things. It takes the same amount of time to do a build outside of Visual Studio as it does inside, but if I can eliminate that 2 minutes of Visual Studio opening up, then it's worth it for me. Because I really don't, when I'm doing like pull request processing, I really don't use Visual Studio other than looking at the code and doing the build. If I've got lightweight tools that'll do that for me, then I'm good. If I were going to dive down into some really heavy duty, really large pull requests, then I might use Visual Studio for that. But for some of these smaller ones, I think the lighter weight tools are a great option. So again,
I think you need a heftier laptop, maybe, something with a little bit more juice. Visual Studio opens up pretty quick for me.
Or
maybe a Mac. Yeah.
Yeah, no, not a Mac.
You can run Visual Studio on Apple Watch now.
yeah, sure you can. And 2 seconds later, you'll be plugging that thing back in to get it re-powered up. So we're just about done with the. I'm actually doing the compile here in the background for the release build. So it's almost done here. We're just waiting for the last couple of items to go. And,
so Joe, the location for your scripts, are they on GitHub as well, or are they somewhere else?
Right now, I think they're on CodePlex,
okay.
And I've got some upgrades to do to them. One of the things is, as Peter and I were talking, one of the challenges you always have with PowerShell scripts is a lot of times you write these things locally, and there's information that ends up leaking into the script about your local configuration. And so whether it's the default directory that you operate out of, or It assumes that you have SQL Server installed or all these other things. So sometimes I hesitate too much to promote the scripts, even though I will in this case, because I don't want people running into all these roadblocks because their system is set up different than mine. The scripts were not created. Well, mine were created generically, but things have changed over the years.
No,
So
but I think you're about to say something that I think is the second aspect of this, which is usually a lot of those scripts are not actually created for public consumption in the sense of they help me get my daily job done, but I never created them with the intent of them spreading around, and I dread the moment that someone else opens them up and says, "Oh my God, what is this? What I'm looking at?" and then starts bombarding me with emails for explanations. So, yeah, we don't always share our stuff, even though we'd love to share it around. There are issues.
yeah, and it's for me, it's like, do I want, this script out there? Do I want everyone saying, well, it won't run on my machine? And it's like, okay, you need to have SQL Server installed. You need to have IIS this version installed. You need to have PowerShell Community enhancements, PSCX installed. So
Yeah.
there are some requirements, and I have certain directories that I expect things to be in, although I do have those somewhat parameterized. So for the most part, I think you could run without using my specific configuration. But
Right.
I do find some edge cases where those configurations are still somewhat built into the scripts. So anyway, we have our build is complete. So if everything looked good in the build, then I could actually go ahead and so I know that I'm building against the standard location. I actually have a PowerShell script that'll bring this up automatically, but we'll just type it in here. I go to it enough; it's in the browser cache at this point. So we'll wait for this to spin up on the local machine, and that should come
The
up.
best part of this is us being able to see your most commonly, seen websites.
Yeah, well,
I'm not going to say anything about NBA.com though, because that's way too controversial.
yes. Well, it's not Boston's fault that they dislocated a guy's arm, in the middle of the playoffs. But what can you say? So, wow. Again, my machine is running a little bit slow today, and for whatever reason, the Google Hangouts is lately has been sucking down a lot of CPU from my machine. So we'll give this another second or two because I'm sure that it's. Come on.
Yeah. I'm looking at mine. I don't know. It might be something specific to your machine. I don't have that much of a CPU usage.
Yeah, there's definitely something hitting it. I mean, I'm not usually I don't have this sort of lag bringing up a new site. And CPU doesn't seem that bad at the moment, but it's still not running well, which I'm not sure why. If I've got that much memory open and that much CPU. So anyway, so I would normally come in here. We'll go ahead and move on. I would normally come in here, go through the install, test out the feature, make sure everything was fine. Once the feature visually, and I went through and did the inspection, everything looked okay. Then the last step that I would do is I would actually run the unit tests for there it goes. I would actually run the unit tests for the application. So in this case, I could do another command that I have. If I was in Visual Studio, I would use the resharper to do that. But here I'm just going to run invoke the DNN tests. Again, I have some various commands that I can use. I'm going to go ahead and skip those for now. I just know that it's going to run the right things. And so this is just going to run NUnit, and it's going to run through all of the unit tests that we have. And I can look through here and see, you know, how many errors we're getting in each particular one. So this will run through. I'll validate all of these errors. There are 10,000 different ways you can run unit tests. As long as you're getting all of the unit tests run and you're not showing any errors, that's what matters. So use whatever unit test framework makes sense for you in your project. Use whatever test runner tools make sense for your project. We'll let this, and I'm not even sure that those unit tests are all going to, I think most of those that I have set up to run in this case are not, oh, that must be why it had problems earlier. I'm not seeing database. It might be that I forgot to run some other command and there's a database missing. So that should be there. Oh, yeah, missing the database. Or is it? Nope. So anyway, we'll let that run. All my tests are running. So at this point, we can assume all the tests completed, and assuming everything looked good. This is a known issue around a file locking with our search implementation on that test running from the console. So assuming everything runs okay and everything checked out okay with unit tests, the next thing I want to do, so now I've validated that it looks visually like we have all the information we need, that I validated that the code itself looks reasonable, I validated that the code runs, I validated that all the unit tests pass. Now I'm ready to actually accept this commit. Now I could come back into source tree or into my command line, and I could merge this change back into development and then do a direct commit up to the remote. And so that's doable. I might do that if I wanted more control over that merge. Maybe there was 5 commits or 10 commits as part of that pull request. I might want to squash all of those into one single commit and merge them in. The other thing I might do is I might rebase that commit so that I don't have 2 parents on the commit in the main branch. There are a lot of different things that you could do here. The simplest thing to do, though, assuming that there were no merge issues, that there were no merge conflicts, is GitHub will basically say, hey, you could merge this directly. Because there's no merge conflicts, you can, once you think this is good, you can just hit this green button here, and this thing will come in, and it'll come in directly, and I don't have to actually do anything on the Git side. GitHub will handle it all for me. One of the nice things there is, so once I confirm that merge, is that I could then, it's going to give me the option to go ahead and delete that branch up on GitHub. So it's going to help me clean up my GitHub repository. The other thing is that at any point I can restore that branch. I could even revert that merge. So I could sort of undo everything that I've just done and do it all from GitHub. So this is actually fairly nice. The only thing I don't like about this is if you remember before, we have all of these items, right? Each of these things coming in from a different branch, from a different pull request, and this happens because we're using that automatic merge feature, right? I prefer, my normal method is to do a rebase into the new environment so that I don't end up with sort of this funky history, if you will, which becomes hard to track down, which one came in at which time, or where did it originate from.
You could safely say that that's useless, actually, those lines.
Yeah, because there are so many of them, you can't realistically, track everything back. So a lot of projects like to keep those clean and won't actually allow you, when they're processing them, they'll want them squashed and rebased. We haven't gotten to the point where everyone's comfortable with that yet, so it's not something that we force on the projects at this point. But for now, you can see that I've got a bunch of things that needed to go back into development. If I were to pull development right now, let's go ahead.
Maybe spend 2 secs on explaining what rebasing actually is.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead, Peter.
Okay, well, yeah, just there's as you can see, the line, the green line that is almost near the top of your screen, just jumps a few commits basically, but those other lines come from a commit way back when, so that might have been like a month ago that some person started to branch out from development and started working on it, and now we're trying to merge in, so then that line creates a huge arc from that commit over a full month. And rebasing actually tells Git, like, what would the world have looked like for that person if he or she started from a current commit, and basically trying to replay all the changes that person made from the current commit. And that way, if that works out correctly, then all of a sudden your arc becomes a lot smaller because it just starts way up when, right, just a few commits back, and immediately comes back into your branch, and that way you keep it clean.
Yeah,
but rebasing is tricky. That's the you can mess things up, so people are a bit hesitant to do it.
Yeah, and it's definitely not for novices, but you can see a couple of them here that probably came in through some sort of a rebase or some sort of a cherry pick. And so why sometimes this is more critical. So we have like our development branch, and then we've got this release branch, right? So right now we are actively in QA on this release branch, but I don't want any other pull requests against that, right? I'm trying to get 7.4.1 stabilized. And so what I might do is, if I find something in the QA process that is like, oh my God, this has to be fixed before we release, I will do a pull request into development. And then I want to basically move that piece of code, or move that change from development and copy it down into this release branch, something called cherry picking. And say we determine that this merge pull request number 462, this one right here, is the one that I want to cherry pick across. And there are all these pull requests after it and all these other pull requests before it. How do I get this one across? Well, if you did a merge like was done here and not a rebase, this pull request effectively has two parents. And in order to do a cherry pick, you need to tell GitHub which parent you want to do the pull from, if that makes sense. So it actually complicates things on the cherry picking side, which, when we get into this time frame like we are right now, is something we do quite frequently. We probably, once we go into QA, we probably have 5 or 6 pull requests that end up getting cherry picked across, sometimes even more than that, depending on how long we're in QA and what issues we find. So there are some really good reasons for doing rebases, but for people who are just coming up to speed on GitHub, a merge is the easiest thing to do, and is the least complicated. So for now, this is the method we use. We use merges, although, you know, if you look at more projects that have been using GitHub for a lot longer, teams that have a lot more experience with it, you'll see a lot of them actually do squashes and rebases in order to keep that history as tight as they can.
So is there any like benefit or downside, like that's more based upon the size of the project versus, you know, a bigger project versus a smaller project? Like in a smaller project, would that be this? Would these issues be the same?
They are the same. It becomes a bigger issue for the big projects because, as you can see, like I have like here, a lot of pull requests that we get are single commits. But there are a number of pull requests we'll get that might be, so here's one, here's a pull request 402 that actually had a couple of commits against it. And so sometimes when you get 3 or 4 commits within, here's one that probably had 4 or 5 commits against this one pull request that had to get pulled in. So there are times when you don't really want all of the details of all of the commits that happen. So a good example might be this one that Peter did on user redirect, right? So Peter's got 5 or 6, it looks like, commits against this one. I don't necessarily need all of that detail of every single tiny little commit once I do the pull in. I could do one description of what all of these changes are about, right? And give it a one-liner that encapsulates all of this, so that my history on here is a little easier to follow, because a lot of those interim commits that Peter does really are details for Peter, not necessarily details for us. You know, like I don't care that the user info object was updated. I care that this is a commit that creates this new feature and what the feature does, right? That's,
yeah, sure, that makes sense.
What I care about. So for bigger projects where you have more pull requests coming in, it's a bigger issue. For smaller projects, you might not be so much. And it really just comes down to how anal you want to be about how clean you want your project to look. I know there are some people who spend a lot of time on rebasing and rewriting history in the project so that their commit history in the main branch reads like a story. You know, like we wanted this feature and then we added that feature, and you know, you can almost read it like prose, if you will, in the history of the project. So now that I've got the code is in, there are a couple more process steps that we have to deal with. So we've got this over here. Let me find the right one. Now I'm going to have trouble finding. There we are. So there are a couple other things that we do. So we use labels a lot in DNN, probably not as much as other projects, but a couple of them. So one of the things we want to do immediately is mark this as merged. Maybe we had rejected this. We'll mark it as won't fix, as maybe this is an enhancement and it's one that we're not going to accept, or maybe they did something wrong in the pull request, or the code is bad. We'll mark it as invalid or a duplicate, or you know. So there are a number of things here that will we might label this as. If it's coming in from the community, I'll have already labeled it a community item. And then the other thing is I'll mark what version it's coming in against. Now I pulled this in against development. I know that the development branch is going to be 742, since that's really our for lack of a better word, that's the development branch we're working against. If I was doing it against that release 741 branch, I would have marked this as a 741 milestone, and what have you. So depending on where I'm bringing it into, I'll mark the appropriate milestone there. And that all of these things, these milestones and these labels, are there so that we can query GitHub and say, show me all of the merged code or all of the merged items, and then show me all of the merged items. Maybe I want to see how many merged items we had against 741, and it looks like there were 131 items that were merged in 741. So I can come down through here and look at all of these, and then I see things like, here's one that was merged and then reverted, so I might go back and investigate that, make sure that I have a real clear status. We probably shouldn't have something here where it's unclear as to what status it's in. I could see, I could look at labels and see, you know, which ones have been merged from the community in 741. I might even go so far as to say which ones were merged from the community where it was Peter Dunker. Right. So I could look and see what did Peter do in 741, or I could say what did Peter do in 740. Right.
So basically, we always want to know what Peter did. What did Peter do?
Yeah, we always want to know what Peter did, because these are the ones that are likely going to have to go and revert potentially. You know, so the use of labels and milestones really helps us when we're managing these things, and that's sort of the last step that we do. The other thing that I would have done here, and the last step for us, is I would go to my issue tracker. So let's go back to this one that we just did. So I've got a merged one here, 6894. So I'm just going to open Jira 6894. So this is just a PowerShell command that I have that gets me into the right spot in Jira. I have one as well for pull requests, but so that just makes sure that I'm here. Let me go ahead and log in. I'm not sure why it's not showing me that already. There we go. And then I can go ahead and say that we merge this pull request. And that will go ahead and finish off the process for us. And then it'll ask me for a comment or whatever. So, okay, so now I've got this pull request. It's been merged. Everything looks good. And we're done. And that's basically our entire pull request process from start to finish on what we go through in order to manage pull requests. The nice thing is, you know, that GitHub really does a lot for you with these commands here in this command line. This helps tremendously to make sure that you're doing things right, especially when you're first getting started and you may not be comfortable with Git. Use this. I use this all the time just to remind me, hey, you got to make sure you're pulling from the right spot or you're branching from the right place. And once you've done this, you know, 5, 10, 20 times, it becomes more second nature. But you know, follow this and you can't go wrong. You know, this obviously doesn't do rebases. This doesn't do squashes or any of the other stuff that you can do with Git, but it'll do the basics. And then once you're comfortable with the basics, then we can talk about how to do the advanced stuff. So that's pretty much it. Any other questions, Peter or Will? Anything you think we missed or we should cover here?
No, I think we're good.
Yeah, and the one thing, yeah, Will.
No, I was just saying I don't have anything either.
Okay. Yeah, the one thing that that I'm going to go ahead and stop presenting here. We'll stop that. So the one thing that I know, you know, having been through this for a while, is that there are a lot of different ways to do things. Peter has his PowerShell scripts. I have my PowerShell scripts. There are 10,000 different Git commands or Git aliases you can use to simplify some of the Git stuff. And ultimately, I think you have to get comfortable with the basics. And once you've done that, once you've mastered the basics, Git pull, Git fetch, Git merge, Git checkout, Git push. When you've done that and you're comfortable with that, then you can start looking at how do I squash, how do I rebase, how do I do these other things. The same with the PowerShell stuff that Peter and I do. If you can do it in Visual Studio and you can figure out how to do your builds and unit tests in Visual Studio, then later on, as you get more experience and you understand what the process is, then it becomes possible to start scripting the process out. But you first have to become comfortable with that basic process. So hopefully, having been through this today, that will become a little bit easier for everyone on the team. So thanks, Will and Peter, for joining me today and redoing this broadcast. Hopefully people will find take number 2 a little bit more complete than take number 1 we did yesterday.
Well, and take number 2 is about 18 minutes shorter, so that's good.
Yeah, so good. We got
18 minutes of looking at a static screen just turning.
This is weird. Visual Studio usually works.
That's right. All of a sudden, nothing works on my machine.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah, great job.